Because, all right, so now it's saying we're live. Let's see what goes on here. Let me just check this on my phone. All right. It looks like we're live. So, all right,
Hello.
let's do. Everybody, if you guys could make sure you hear Natasha. Natasha, say hello.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully the sound works now.
All right, let me. I'm just gonna verify. Yep. All right. So Amy, always helpful. Amy verified that your sound works good, so that's great.
Hi, Amy.
Welcome to Meal Mentor Live. This is our first episode with our interviewee, Natasha. Natasha has been a Meal Mentor member since at least 2015, unless she had like another account that I don't know about.
No.
And so the kind of this is, like I said, this is the first run at this. We've got a handful of questions that we're gonna that I've kind of done myself, and then we've got some community questions. We're going to try to keep this to probably no more than 15 minutes. But I'm going to just kind of get you started, Natasha, and let you tell us a little bit about, if you want to just give your first name and where you're from, and then how long you've been, how you came to the plant-based diet, and, just kind of your little backstory.
Well, my name's Natasha. I grew up in North Carolina, near Raleigh, and I currently live in Virginia. I definitely did not grow up in a plant-based household. I will say, though, credit to primarily my mother and my grandmother. I guess probably growing up in the South, I was, exposed to a lot of vegetables. My grandmother had a garden when I was really young, and so I grew up, eating lots of vegetables and wasn't afraid of trying vegetables, so that was a good thing, but certainly was not a plant-based household. Got some exposure to the plant-based world. One of my aunts, I think she actually became a vegan like in the late 90s. So that, I remember thinking that was kind of different and weird, but never really contemplated that it would be me, that I would go down that path. It was actually when I was in law school, I had a research and writing assignment that involved doing some research on PETA. And that's kind of how I got exposed to the idea of, at least it became more real for me. And then I made a decision. It was more of an ethical decision at that point. I became a vegan, and then it wasn't a linear path for me. At some point, I did go back and start eating like eggs and dairy, and I don't know. And then several years later, I went back and started a plant-based journey.
So how long ago was law school?
I finished 5 years ago.
Okay.
But I became a vegetarian almost 8 years ago now.
Okay.
And then I did that for a few years, and it was probably about towards the end of 2013, I started transitioning to a completely plant-based diet. At that point, I started considering more the health aspects of the lifestyle, and knew I needed to make some changes based on where I was, with respect to my health and my weight. So
do you remember?
It wasn't an overnight switch for me.
Do you remember what it was that was kind of the catalyst that kind of got you interested in doing plant-based and focusing on health more?
I think for me, I was kind of an overweight, well, I wasn't kind of, I actually was an overweight kid, generally was always like the biggest kid in my class, and had lost some weight when I was in high school, but it didn't like stick or anything. So I knew, at least from a health perspective, I needed to lose weight. I mean, my health providers never really explicitly said anything, but it was pretty obvious. I mean, I was, I think, what would be considered morbidly obese at that point, well over 350 pounds. So, and I'm not, I'm like 5'10", so I'm a pretty tall person, but I'm not, I don't think anyone should probably be that big. But anyway, I was nearing my 30s. I think I was maybe 28 or 29 at the time, and I just kind of figured, I'd always heard people say, hey, your metabolism slows down as you get older. If you're going to make changes, you should make them when you're young. And so I don't know if it was kind of a quarter life crisis, but, I just started thinking, okay, Natasha, you need to probably start thinking about making changes sooner than later, maybe while you have your youth going for you. So, at that point, I think maybe I had come across Susan Boyson at Fat Free Vegan Kitchen blog, and I don't know, I started trying some of her recipes, and then, I don't know, probably a Google search or something, I found Happy Herbivore, and it all kind of started from there.
Great. So, I guess one of the things that when you were, if you can think back to when you were just getting started, what were some things that you were struggling with, and maybe, what are you struggling with today, versus then?
When I was first starting, I would say, I don't think I really understood what like a whole food plant-based diet is. And so I think in the beginning, I don't know that I would say I was struggling with it, but I was still, cooking with some oil. And at that point maybe knew that I shouldn't be doing it, but, I didn't really see the importance of it. And I think also a challenge for me at that point, it's been a while ago, so it's kind of hard to think back, but I think for me at that point, it was hard to keep my diet interesting. I don't think I had a lot of variety. I was, for the longest, I'd always been kind of an oatmeal girl for breakfast, so that was not an issue for me. But lunches and dinners were a little bit harder to keep interesting and to keep me kind of motivated to stick with the lifestyle. I think Happy Herbivore has been a huge part of addressing that issue. I would say now, thankfully I don't have that issue. And I think for me at this point, I've kind of settled into the diet, and it really is just kind of like my new normal. I would say for me now, my challenges probably more so lie in not like overeating on certain foods, and they're not necessarily unhealthful foods, but recognizing that I can't just eat a pound of asparagus every night, or.
So what are some things that make you want to eat, just continue eating?
I don't know. Like, for example, last summer, I'm a really big fruit eater. I love fruit, especially summer fruit. And last summer I went like kind of wild eating fruit. I was eating like bowls and bowls of fruit after dinner at night. And, I probably gained 5 to 10 pounds last year. And I attribute that a lot, in large part, to the overeating that I was doing after dinner. And I wasn't eating, I was eating bananas and cherries and, blueberries and things like that, which are all very health promoting foods. But I was eating them in excess of my calorie needs.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really a weakness or a vulnerability of mine, and something I have to keep in check, because otherwise I can really, get in trouble, so to speak.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting because it totally mirrors a lot of some of the stuff Lindsay has talked about herself with, even you can. It doesn't matter what you're eating if you overdo lettuce, if you overdo potatoes, fruit in your case, it just adds up and kind of gets you over your calorie needs. So, so were you cooking whenever you were much before you came to the plant-based diet, or?
Sporadically. Generally for lunch, I would take like sandwiches. So that was, pretty low cooking requirement. And breakfast, a lot of times I would eat cereal. But yeah, for dinner, I would say maybe at least 50% of the time I was cooking.
Okay.
And they weren't extravagant meals, but they were home cooked meals. Before Meal Munter, while I was plant based, yes, I was cooking. I did a lot of pasta for dinner and soups and that sort of thing. So I think I was accustomed to spending some time in the kitchen, so cooking wasn't completely new to me.
Yeah.
But I definitely, at this point, I pretty much cook all of my meals, and I love it.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's one of the and I want to dig more into this, but it's one of the things that I think is possibly one of the things that makes transitioning difficult is a lot of people aren't cooking, or they're not cooking very often, and so when you transition to needing to cook more often, I think it creates this big burden, because it's this big mountain to climb where you don't have maybe the right kitchen utensils, like knives and cutting boards.
Right.
You don't have the right pantry stuff. You don't have the right just normal staples, and you just don't have. You're just not comfortable, because I don't cook that often. I'm cooking maybe twice a week, but I find that if I go several weeks or something without cooking, I'm even uncomfortable. I'm like, oh, where is things? And Lindsay has a very, very organized kitchen, and that's another aspect. If your kitchen's not organized, it makes it very stressful to try to find things.
Oh.
And so I think a lot of the trick with this stuff is that people just come to this. They're trying to do something, but there's all these layers of things that just makes it more difficult. And so we're trying to get better at identifying those things and then helping people overcome those.
Oh.
So
I think
go ahead.
I completely agree, and I think especially if someone transitions, it can be overwhelming to figure out what they need to do in the kitchen, what they need as far as food ingredients, and as far as the tools and utensils and all that sort of thing. I would say for me, it was not something that happened overnight. And I think people probably should give themselves some grace and be patient with themselves. It took probably years for me to accumulate, the pots and pans that I have, the silverware, all the spices. I didn't buy spices, I probably have, 30 to 40 spices now. I didn't buy all of those overnight. And quite frankly, all those aren't needed. I'm just kind of crazy in that way. And, when I first started, I wouldn't have known what to do with all those spices. I mean, I would say it probably would be helpful for someone to get a core, as far as spices, for example, like core spices. And a lot of people probably already have, things like garlic powder, onion powder, basil, oregano in their pantries. Probably a lot of omnivore families have those spices. I would say for me, one of my favorites is smoked paprika, and I think don't even bother with the regular paprika. If you have the smoked, you're good to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say also for people, it might be helpful in the beginning to just identify maybe just a couple recipes that they think they might like, or that they try and they realize they like, and to incorporate those on a weekly basis. I think generally most families probably have a handful, a dozen or so recipes that they just cycle. Most people eat the same sorts of things over and over and over, and I think that's fine. You don't necessarily need a ton of variety in your diet, so I think if people just kind of identify a few as they go along and they accumulate more as time passes, I think that's helpful. And then also think about the sorts of things that you enjoyed when you were an omnivore, and think about how to adapt those.
Yeah, that's great.
To make them more plant-based.
Yeah. Would you say your kitchen is more? Do you put more effort into organizing your kitchen at all?
Recently, I did do a revamp of my spices. So I do have a designated spice drawer, and I have them in alphabetical order and all that sort of thing.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I actually took that tip from someone else in the the VIP group. So that's been really helpful. I just kind of pull all the spices that I might need when I'm about to cook, and I keep those out, and then I just put everything back in the drawer once I'm done cooking. So I find that's really helpful. As far as pots and pans, my space is sort of limited, so it's kind of hard to get too disorganized. Obviously, I have a place designated for plates and that sort of thing, and all of my spoons and utensils and that sort of thing.
So I was going to go ahead and get into some of the VIP group questions. So Kristen Walker wanted to know how you were staying motivated.
I would say it's probably different now than it was when I was transitioning in the beginning. I would say in the beginning, I was motivated by like the results that I was seeing. Like as I said, I was someone who was over 350 pounds, and at that point, it was difficult for me, for example, to walk briskly for more than like a block. So for me to see the weight come off gradually, and in the beginning it's pretty quick, to see that and to see, measurable change and increase in my ability to walk and to walk without pain. I used to have bad knee pain. And I think one day I just woke up and it was like I realized I didn't have knee pain anymore. So that was huge for me. So I think that's what kept me motivated in the beginning. At this point, several years in, I think one thing, I'll give a plug to the VIP group. I think the VIP group is really helpful and supportive and welcoming environment. I think seeing other people's journeys and successes, I think that solidifies for me my commitment to this lifestyle. But also, quite frankly, I love the food, and I love the results I've seen in my life. So I guess it's kind of connected to the beginning, but it's a little different now. I can't even envision doing anything differently at this point. I know how I feel eating this way and living this way, and I don't want to go back.
That's great. That's great. And because you have this in your Instagram profile, I think the way it reads is you're down 190 pounds. Is that right?
At this point, it's like 200. Yeah.
That's
from
incredible.
when I first started.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Well done. I mean, that's just amazing. That's so great to hear. So, so let's go on to the next question. So, I think this is something that probably a lot of people struggle with, and it's so Tina asked about how do you deal with relationships of people and that are supportive or not supportive, or maybe teasing and that kind of thing.
So I do live alone. So I think, I sympathize with people who have families, and particularly spouses who may or may not be supportive. So for me, I would say it's a lot easier, to live this way because I do live alone. And so as long as I keep my environment, compliant and, healthy or whatever, it's pretty easy, to maintain this. I will say I do have family members. So I want to say I have 3 or 4 other family members who actually do Meal Mentor. So
that's amazing.
As far as, and they started after I did, as far as, family gatherings and stuff like that, I always know there's going to be food that I can eat. And even a lot of my omnivore family members are really open to trying new and different things and eating plant-based. So that's really been a huge blessing.
Well, it's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah. And I would say,
sorry.
I would just say for people who may have spouses who are not the most, or not just spouses or significant others, just anybody in their lives that may not be the most supportive, my one tip is you can't change anyone else. And I don't think you should necessarily try. I would say enjoy your life, enjoy what you're doing, and be warm and open to other people if they genuinely are asking questions. Like I have a lot of coworkers who kind of pick on me about the way I eat and that sort of thing, but you can tell if someone's like genuinely inquiring and they really want information. But I generally don't offer information unless it's solicited. But
cool.
Yeah, I would defer to the other people in the group who have spouses and significant others that people they live with that may not be the most supportive.
So, Amy Michelle asked if you had a photographic memory because you seem to remember every recipe.
I think I had a better photographic memory when I was younger, but
it works pretty good regardless. Yeah. So, another question. This is kind of a softball. Do you have a favorite fruit or vegetable that just random softball?
Oh my goodness, I love them all. As far as vegetables, probably broccoli or asparagus.
Okay.
Fruit, probably cherries and grapes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Very cool. Oh yeah, I love some cherries, man. This is the time of year too with cherries.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I love this time of year for that. Yeah.
So Christine asked. So you say you travel for work. How do you stay on track when you're traveling?
Thankfully for work, generally I'm only doing day trips. I think I've only done a couple overnight trips, and they're all like I don't fly. I'm always in a car, so it's a lot easier to plan ahead, and I have a lot more control over the food that I take with me. So generally, if I'm going to spend the night somewhere, most hotels have refrigerators or microwaves. So generally, I'll take like a little cooler with me, at least so I can make breakfast in the hotel room. And generally, I'll have a dinner prepared for the first night. And depending on what type of event I'm going to, generally there'll be something that I can eat there. But as far as just like day trips, like if I'm going, like recently I've had to go to Northern Virginia up near DC during the day for work. I just take my lunch with me and pack it in a chill lunch box, and that's usually sufficient. Cool. It's worked out really well. But there's always, for example, Wendy's on the road is a really good option. They have baked potatoes and salads. Jason's Deli, if one of those is around. There's always an option.
Cool. So because we had two different questions, one from Christina and one from Veronica. Basically asking if you tracked your health journey or weight loss, or did you do any of food journaling, that kind of stuff? I'm just curious.
Before Meal Mentor, I definitely kept like a food journal. It wasn't, I just literally would write down, it was something I kept on my computer. I would just write down like everything that I ate that day. And I don't know why I started that, but it is something I did. And I think I weighed myself maybe once a week back then. As time progressed, like once I started Meal Mentor, I did stop doing the food journal. And I think at some point I probably was weighing myself like daily. I knew that the daily fluctuations, most people fluctuate daily. I knew I didn't put much weight in that. But for some reason, I really liked the data, so I was weighing myself daily. I don't think it was necessarily helpful. I'm not one of those people, though, that it was detrimental to. I think for some people, it probably can be more harmful than good to weigh themselves daily. At this point, for the last few months, I've been weighing myself monthly. So I learned this from Dr. Doug Lyle. I'll just weigh myself like 3 or 4 consecutive days in a month, and then I'll weigh myself the next month around the same time frame and take an average of those 2 months and then compare those. I think it's a lot harder to see genuine fat loss or change within a shorter amount of time. So I don't know. I think it can be helpful to, especially with the food journal, if you're someone who's who suspects they're overeating, I think it can be helpful to keep that just to for the accountability, the self-accountability.
One of the interesting things about whenever I've done it is that it becomes like this factor where I go, oh, now I'm going to have a record that I ate this. And I'm like,
right.
Do I really want to have a record that I ate this? And then I'm going to have to reflect on that. And it's interesting how that like self-referential peer pressure like can sometimes make you like, and I've not done an extensive amount of it. I think I've not lasted more than like 3 days at a time and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I've done a bunch of different fasts and stuff like that, so they're like a totally different kind of random thing. But all right, let me. So we've gone through all the fan questions. So I kind of want to, what would you tell or what would you do for somebody who's kind of just getting started? Like, what would you recommend? How would they start? Like, I know you had mentioned something about like pick a couple of recipes and kind of start with that, but I'm kind of curious what your advice to somebody just getting started would be.
I mean, this is kind of like 20,000 foot overview, but I would just tell them to be patient.
Yeah.
This is not, a sprint. It's a marathon. Nothing's going to change overnight. You don't want it to. You want to go through the steps you need to go through, and those I think are different for everyone. To discover, I think you discover who you are more, and how to make this work for you. And I think you grow and develop during that process. I think people need to be more gracious to themselves. Give themselves room to make mistakes, room to slip up. I never would have envisioned when I started almost 5 years ago that I would be where I am now. And I don't, back then I didn't have the tools or the resources that I have now, but, I think what I had then was the drive and the desire to make the next step. That's all you need to do. Just make the next step, the next best choice.
That's fantastic.
Don't worry about, I think some people get so bogged down in the details that then they just get overwhelmed and they stop. It's just do the next best thing, and just be gracious with yourself. I mean, that's going to get you there. And I think eventually things will snowball, and then you'll wake up in a year and you'll find yourself in a completely different place. But yeah, be patient with yourself.
I think that's incredible advice. I mean, I think that's, I think it's probably one of the best things you could tell anybody ever. Is just be patient, realize that this is going to be measured in, your success is going to be measured in months and years and decades, not, days and weeks and hours and stuff. So. Yeah. If you always have that really long horizon that this is about, like, this is how I'm going to live the rest of my life, I think it gives you a little different perspective, and it's like, okay, I made this mistake, but I'm going to keep at it. So, to wrap up, I was going to say, what is kind of who from the community do you want to hear interviewed next?
I'd love to hear Amy.
Amy, okay, all right, cool. I think she's a great interview. I don't know if she's on the list or not because I've got Tyler managing that, but yeah, I think she'd be great. She's been doing this for a long time and has a lot of smart things to say.
Yeah,
so.
I look up to her. She's like, she's the professional.
You guys are kind of close. Have you guys ever met in person?
We have not. We are kind of close, I think.
She's definitely in the Northern Virginia area. I'm not exactly sure, how far you guys are apart, but yeah, very cool. Very cool. All right, Natasha. Well, thank you very much for being the first interviewee on the Meal Mentor live Happy Reward Meal Mentor live show. I'm basically just trying to get this thing launched and try to encourage people to get out there, try the diet, download the free sample meal plan, sign up for Meal Mentor, see how it works. We have a 30-day refund. We're here to help you on this journey. Participation is the only way that you are able to be successful in these diets, and this is why we want interviews and real stories of people like yourself sharing, because people will watch this interview and they will connect with what you've had to say, and it will help them kind of take that next step. So thank you very much. And
happy to be here.
Yeah. Have a great day.
You guys. See ya.
Bye.